And the District 9 City Councilor. I'd like to welcome our friends from the Department of Neighborhood Development as part of our FY20 budget review as they pertain to dockets 0622 through 0625, orders for the fiscal year 20 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, annual appropriation for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, and appropriation for certain transportation and public realm improvements, as well as dockets 0626 through 0628, capital budget appropriations, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. I'd like to remind everyone this is a public hearing being broadcast on RCN 82, Comcast 8, Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'd like to ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At various points throughout the hearing, we will entertain public testimony. There are numerous ways for the public to engage in this process. You can come to the public hearing and testify live on the floor. You can also come to a hearing dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 4th, between the hours of 2 and 6. However, we would stay longer if folks, if the testimony prolongs that time frame. You can also send us testimony to the Committee on Ways and Means, Boston City Council, 5th floor, Boston City Hall, Boston 02201, or email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. I will like to introduce my colleagues in order of their arrival. To my left, Councilor at Large Michelle Wu. Next to her, Councilor Ed Flynn. Next to him, Councilor Josh Zakem. And on my far right, Councilor Campbell has just stepped out, and to my far right is Councilor Frank Baker. And we want to welcome you, Chief, and your team, and you have the floor.
Thank you. It's great to be here this afternoon. I want to thank Councilor Siomo for not just today for holding the hearing, but for all of your work from these many years. It's been a pleasure working with you.
And the same for me to you. Thank you.
So I'm here with colleagues down here in the, as we used to call it, the pit, right? Lila Bernstein, who oversees our supportive housing division, Rick Wilson, our A&F director, and Donald Wright, who oversees all things property management. I wrote some remarks yesterday. I think they're too long, so I'll try to abbreviate them. I know you just got out of a very long hearing, but there is a lot going on that I do want to talk about. So I'm hoping to just highlight last year, talk a little bit about what we want to accomplish in fiscal year 20, and then talk a wee bit about the budget, and then certainly take your questions. So as you know, DND has five divisions. We create low, moderate, and middle-income housing for Boston residents. We fight to end homelessness. We help homeowners buy and maintain their homes. We support renters in housing crisis, and we work with our neighborhoods to dispose of city-owned property. Fiscal 19 was another very busy year, another productive year. We started off the year by updating our housing plan, Mayor Walsh's housing plan. We looked at lots of factors, including a growing population, demographics, income, and we also listened to what Boston residents were saying, what they thought was working and what they thought needed improvement and enhancement. So we changed our housing plan we put forth a production goal of 69,000 units, and we increased all of our affordable housing targets. We renewed our commitment to work with the BHA and nonprofits to preserve the affordable housing that we have. We are putting an increased emphasis on displacement in our displacement programs, working closely with our nonprofits. And we recognize, as you all have recognized for a long period of time, Boston can't be the only city or town working on this issue. So Mayor Walsh teamed up with Mayor Curtatone. They worked with the regional town managers and mayors and put forth a regional housing goal. So the results are fairly impressive. To date, we have permitted 29,000 units of housing. Over 5,000 of those are deed-restricted affordable. We also are relying on our development partners to develop market rate housing that is more affordable with a little a, but 5,100 units are new deed-restricted below market housing. We've also worked very hard, as I mentioned, to preserve what we have. We've been working very closely with the BHA on the Old Colony housing development, and working on Charlestown and finishing up Orient Heights. It's because the BHA has a goal of preserving 4,500 units in their portfolio and working very closely with them. And we've also been working very closely with the HUD Tenant Alliance on the 13A developments. I know some of these are in, some of them are in your districts, and they've been very difficult because they're very expensive. So we've been working very, very hard on the 13A developments. This year we helped close Newcastle. They have a new owner, the Fenway CDC, so that will remain affordable. And we are very close to a deal on the Forbes apartments in Jamaica Plain, and I know Councilor O'Malley has been very interested in that development. We've got two difficult developments left. That's the Mercantile and Babcock and Brighton. So those are our next two. So as we build new affordable housing, we have to always be looking back at our 54,000 existing units to make sure that they are preserved. Displacement continues to be an issue, though. We are all worried about that. I know you all share that concern. In fiscal year 19, we contracted with 11 nonprofit agencies to provide housing services, including housing search, emergency shelter, eviction prevention, rent arrearage, court advocacy, and tenant-landlord mediation. I know Councilor Edwards knows this work well because she started that office when she was with us, and the work continues. Last year, we provided assistance to 2,800 renters facing, not everybody's facing eviction, but certainly rental issues. In addition to assisting renters, we've stepped up our efforts to help residents buy a home. Last year, we graduated 1,300 households or units in home buyer education classes. We provided 110 families with down payment and closing cost assistance. We provided 175 homeowners foreclosure prevention services, and we helped 1,400 homeowners with minor and major home repairs. So that unit has been very, very busy. The homeless and supportive housing team has also been very hard at work. To date, DND and its partners have housed over 100,000 homeless veterans, and we have housed over 700 chronically homeless individuals. We're housing more than that, but were in our plan and in our target. We've just completed a plan to end youth homelessness, and HUD, based on that plan, awarded us $4.9 million in federal money to begin this important work. Last year, we hired a consulting team to examine our adult homeless shelter system to see how we can lessen the inflow into shelter and how the shelter experience can be improved from what it is now. And the mayor announced, as you know, the creation of the Boston Way Home Fund with the goal of raising $10 million to create 200 units, at least, of permanent supportive housing. The good news is we've raised over $6 million, and the first housing site has been identified in Jamaica Plain, and that will be over 200 units of supportive housing. So we're very excited about that because we don't have, while we have some supportive housing in our portfolio, we don't have enough. So I can't be more pleased on what we've accomplished this year, but I wake up and I'm sure you share my concern that there's still a lot to do. Looking forward in fiscal year 20, I just want to highlight a few things that we're working on. We will continue to build more affordable housing. That is key. It is at the root of all that we do. We have a very, very healthy pipeline of projects that we will fund, and we will lobby hard at the state that they fund as well. We are also beginning to work more closely with all of our nonprofit partners to buy existing stock in our neighborhoods. That's a twofer. It keeps the tenants in place, and it adds to our permanently affordable housing stock. Councilor Edwards is aware that we bought quite a lot of buildings, I think 30 or so buildings in East Boston, not we, but NOAA. And we just had a for-profit actually buy a building in Dorchester. South Boston NDC just bought 15 units that was on the market. So I think nonprofits and for-profits are getting used to the program, and that's good news to us because we have a goal of taking at least 1,000 units out of the market. We will assist 4,000 individuals with home buying classes this year, foreclosure prevention, down payment assistance, and home repair programs. So we want to continue to help people buy and maintain home ownership opportunities. And the Homeless Division will place 200 chronically homeless individuals and 200 homeless veterans into permanent housing. Implementing the mayor's $5 million new investment from increasing the room occupancy tax, we will build new supportive housing for our homeless residents. And we will update the city's plan for homeless individuals, focusing on housing opportunities and improving homeless shelters and reducing the number entering shelters, as I mentioned. So that work is going to begin in the next several weeks, and we hope to have an updated plan in upcoming months. And as displacement continues to be of utmost concern, we will continue to work with our nonprofit partners to provide housing search, legal referrals, and assistance with rent arrearage. While this work will stop many evictions, we know that we need additional tenant protections. This is why we have worked with the State House to file 3 important bills, and a few are actually getting momentum this year that we're very happy about. We filed a bill that so tenants can get legal representation. Councilor Edwards worked on that bill 2 years ago. There's a good coalition building, and we feel very optimistic about that. We filed a bill so that tenants could purchase buildings or what am I trying to say? Right of first refusal, but they could buy or they could hand that right over to assign that right to a nonprofit. Thank you very much. So that has also got some excitement at the State House. And finally, we filed a bill that would require just cause to evict our elderly residents and would limit their rent increases to 5% per year. So we're very hopeful that all 3 of those bills get momentum and get passed, because we know even though we're working with a lot of tenants, they do need additional protections. Let me very, very quickly give an overview of our budget, and then I will certainly hand it back to you. D&D's fiscal year 20 recommended operating budget totals $20.6 million. This represents an increase of $6.4 million, or a 45% increase over fiscal year 19. This increase is primarily due to new investments in homelessness, including $4 million to build permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals, $1 million to combat youth homelessness, and $300,000 for homeless peer navigators, formerly homeless individuals who will help those that are currently homeless connect with housing and services. There are also new investments of $650,000 to help homeowners build accessory dwelling units in their homes, because while we've made it easier to approve these units, it is still an expensive undertaking. And $100,000 for intergenerational home share program, which we piloted through the Housing Innovation Lab, but now we want to help a nonprofit scale up that very innovative idea of pairing students, mostly grad students, with our elders. Our operating funding is vitally important to the department because it supports activities not eligible for external uses such as property management, and it funds the Housing 20 special appropriations, which supports our work with at-risk tenants, the homeless, and various housing production and preservation programs. In fiscal year 20, as in other fiscal years, we're going to apply and fight for every external revenue source we can. D&D's all-fund budget of $105 million this year includes an estimated $85 million in external funds. The majority of this funding comes in the form of grants from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, such as CDBG and Home, allowing D&D to carry out a wide range of housing and community development programs. Our external sources also include $20 million from the Inclusionary Development Fund, which will be used to create income-restricted housing across the city. In the upcoming weeks, we will be back here to request approval from the Housing and Community Development Committee to accept and expend the fiscal year federal entitlement grants and IDP revenue. So we will continue to leverage other city revenue sources not reflected in our budget, including Neighborhood Housing Trust, which is our linkage program, and CPA, which we used very wisely last year and created a lot of new affordable housing. So when you add in When you add in linkage, you add in CPA, you add in our federal money, and this very important operating budget, next year's a budget for D&D hopefully will total $125 million that we will be using to house Boston residents. This is the highest ever budget, certainly reflecting our commitment to house all of our residents. So I know I talked fast and I said a lot, but I didn't want to go on too long, but we've had a productive fiscal year 19. We want to continue the momentum in fiscal year 20, and we're excited about the increases in this year's operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Dillon. And as soon as you started your presentation, we were joined by Councilor Kim Janey and Councilor Lydia Edwards. Councilor Michelle Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. As I had mentioned to the chief beforehand, I'm sorry I have to run right out of here. So my only question was a data request that we've already talked about public land and how much of it has been disposed of in various ways. Thank you.
Sure. So we have been working hard on our land inventory. The land that we have left is, it's getting more and more difficult to develop because the parcels aren't as easy. We right now own 1,193 parcels. 428 are in 406, excuse me, are in active disposition process, meaning that an RFP's out, community process has begun, or we have it under agreement and we're waiting for the developer to line up their permits and financing. And then another 550 parcels are in research and review. Half of those are in the West Roxbury Grove, which has remained a very challenging set of parcels given their very small right-of-ways. So there's 900 parcels that we know well and that are in some stage of disposition. But we will get you a full report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Siamo, and thank you to the panelists for being here and for your work on this important issue. Sheila, I know you talked about IDP in your opening statements. What can you tell us about the enforcement of that? I know there have been some cases where developers have advertised for these units as affordable and then turned around and sold them for market rate. Is your office doing a thorough research inventory on if that's an isolated case or is it common practice?
So the way that the Division of Labor works, Counselor, is that if units are created or are supposed to be created on-site or off-site, they're like IDP units, the BPDA regulates, they sign an agreement with the developer and they monitor that agreement. When D&D gets involved, if a developer is paying out to meet their obligation, that money comes to D&D. We put it out through competitive RFPs, and we monitor those units. So we are in the collection business, and we spend the money, but we don't monitor when physical units are created. The BPDA does.
Okay, that was an issue in South Boston recently. So I'm trying to get a number of units that should have been affordable that went to market rate. Clear violation. Myself and Councilor Flaherty are working on that. But if you're able to help us on that issue.
We can certainly work with our colleagues at the BPDA and get you that report.
Okay, thank you. And Sheila, I know you were with us at the recent rally to preserve row houses in Chinatown. That's a neighborhood that's important to you and to me as well, and to the mayor. What can D&D do in terms of helping us on that issue? Can we invest in some of those row houses? We invest in a lot of neighborhoods, so are we able to try to help that community out?
It's a really good question, and I was happy to be there with you on the because I think it's important to preserve Chinatown, the neighborhood and the affordability and the residents that live there. And it's also important to preserve the beautiful architecture that is there in those important buildings. They have a lot of history. So DND, working with the mayor, we've been very, very interested in increasing the amount of affordable housing that is in Chinatown. Right now, we've got parcel 12, which the BPDA has put out. We've got 50 Herald. We've got the Tai Tung parking lot. We've got LaGrange 2. And these are in the forefront of my brain all the time because I'm always trying to advance projects in Chinatown. The row houses are a little bit of a challenge in that their acquisition prices are now like $1.5 million for 3 small units. So it's hard to make the numbers work and to convert them into affordable housing, something that D&D can invest in. It's not impossible, but it would take, and I've met with Lydia Lowe and others on this, it would take, $400,000 per unit of subsidy needed to sort of buy and convert. So I want to continue to work with the neighborhood groups there and see what we can do. I think it is going to be important through the BPDA planning process that the row houses get the proper zoning at the end of this and what our zoning that reflects preservation. So I want to continue to work with you and the neighborhood group to look at the row houses and how we can convert those into affordable units. Just the price tag to acquire is so high.
I'm afraid if we, and I know Councilor Edwards has been a strong supporter on this issue as well, but I know if the city doesn't get involved on this issue, it'll only be a matter of time before these immigrants are displaced. These longtime residents are displaced, elderly are displaced, and we turn it into some type of Airbnb, short-term rental. But when you do that, you really dismantle a great American neighborhood. So just asking again if we can think outside the box and to see what D&D is capable of doing. There's so much great wealth in this city and right around that neighborhood. Some of the biggest buildings in the country are right around Chinatown. If we can build the Ritz-Carlton right there, let's preserve some row houses.
I think you are onto something. I know that the BPDA was looking at whether a developer had an obligation, an affordable housing obligation, and could they park that affordable housing obligation at the row houses. So I will follow up on that too,
Okay.
Councilor, to see if that, because developers have deeper pockets, so that might be a good strategy.
Yeah, I just don't want to let these developers off the hook.
I will say, we were looking at this statistic the other day, during since the Walsh administration, 70% of the housing that has been created in Chinatown has been deed restricted affordable. It's a very, very good percentage, and I'd like to keep that going.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you. And we've been joined by Councilors Anise Sabi-George and O'Malley. Chair recognizes Josh Sakam.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to see you and your team. Thank you for everything you guys do all year on this issue. I'm particularly excited about the successes we've had with the Fenway CDC really the last couple of years on some large, somewhat fast-paced projects at the end of the day, both the Burbank Gardens and the Newcastle Apartments.
It's good.
It was,
Yep.
it's great to see, and that's the preservation aspect, which I think a lot of people forget about when we're talking about affordable housing, that with the expiring use, with, whether it's deed restricted that comes in onto the market at market rate, or just rising rents in general, preserving what exists is incredibly important. And to that point, you want to just, again, turn your attention to the West End. We have the Amy Lowell Apartments. I know you and I have had long discussions about that, and I know we're luckily still several years away from that expiring use, but it is at the forefront of the hundreds of seniors and low-income folks who do live there of addressing that. And they'll need a solution now. I know we're setting up a time to go over there and talk to them, but
Hopefully we have a time.
yes, and I think it's next week actually.
Good.
And it is really important that people know, and it goes right into the point of the Office of Housing Stability of tenants knowing their rights and how effective that can be, as well as the legislative push at the city level. So I thank you for that. Couple questions. I know we're all on the clock. Everyone has a lot to say. Boston, I think we can always do better, but we do a pretty good job, I think, percentage-wise, I think of, inclusionary development, all this, compared to many of our peer cities. What is going on from a more regional approach? And I don't mean just, Cambridge and Somerville, which are, I think, trying to do similarly to us, but some more of the suburban areas where this is a regional issue. It needs a regional solution. Do we have anything on that? I know some of our suburban friends can be resistant to any sort of density. Do you have anything we're working on that this body can help with, or that shows some promise?
So I had mentioned that the Mayor Walsh and Mayor Curtatone are working with 14 surrounding cities and towns, and they have a goal of creating 185,000 units. There is not an affordable housing goal within that, but just to get the surrounding towns to embrace some multifamily housing would be a very good thing. We every year have to track and send to the state how much affordable housing that we have. And we have about 20% of our housing stock is deed restricted affordable. 27% of our rental stock is deed restricted affordable. I think it's probably one of the highest percentages in the country. And I look at places like Belmont, 4%, and I could go, I have the list here if anyone's interested, and it really is a shame, and we really do need our surrounding cities and towns to do more for lots of reasons. It's good for them, it promotes diversity, and they should be embracing and helping us with this regional issue, especially if it's next to good transit. So the governor has filed a housing choice bill that would make it easier for cities and towns with a simple majority, not a 3/4 majority, to approve new housing projects. That is a start. And some of us would like to see that bill also incorporate an affordable housing goal, but my affordable housing friends will say, if we can't get that, we can't build affordable housing if we can't even get, multifamily housing approved. Well, good point. So we are supporting the governor's bill, and I think it probably will pass. So it might be that while it might be easier for cities and towns to do more.
Yeah, no, that would be hugely helpful, because I do think, obviously, supply and demand, and Boston alone, we can't build our way out of this in Boston. I think I applaud your efforts. I don't mean this as a criticism, but it needs to fall on everyone in the Commonwealth, and certainly in the metro region with our rising costs.
Agree.
On that point, inclusionary development policy, we touched on that a little bit. There have been some discussions about updating that once again. Obviously, was it 2015 when we did it? So that's already, 4 years ago. Where are we on that? I know that's your office, the mayor's, BPDA, and others, but any update on that?
We are involved, though. So I think it was July 15. So we said we would look at it again in 3 years. The BPDA has hired a talented outside consultant, sort of a similar process as last year, Landwise, that really understands inclusionary development, and the consultant has been meeting with affordable housing advocates to better understand need, and developers to better understand their development pro formas, to see if there is any more we can get out of private development as far as extraction, either units or money. So that work is ongoing. There's a pretty tight timeline. I wish I had brought it, but I think I think the work is going to be concluded in months.
So on that point, something I would ask in your area of expertise, a lot of what I hear from folks who are opposing increasing the inclusion development is like, oh, it's easy to say now in good times to do it, but when it's not good times, it's going to really slow things down. Is there a mechanism, or is there discussion about, I don't even know what we would look at, but some sort of index we could say, in boom times, we're going to be more aggressive with this, but at the same time, when times aren't as good, we can have some sort of, I don't know what the right word is, a range, because that's the biggest concern I do hear from folks. And it's, like I said, times are good now. I think it's a good time to get more out of folks who are building in the city for affordable housing.
Right. The last time we did it in this time, the consultant builds a model, and they look at land values, construction prices, rents, sales prices. So I think the index is an interesting idea, but it's one variable out of probably 5 or 6 or 7. we do have a home rule petition that would allow IDP to be baked into zoning. So we could, more often than not, if there was a downturn, just do an independent third-party analysis. It takes months, like I said, not years, and then go to the zoning commission and change it. And I know these processes need a lot of input, et cetera, but it may be more complicated than tying it to a simple index. But it's an idea worth looking at.
And I know we have short on time, so I want to thank you for that. I do have to step out in a little bit. I'm going to try and come back because I do have some more questions, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. Sorry, Cora. Thank you, Councilor Siomo, and Chief, thank you, as well as the team that is sitting with you, those sitting behind me, and all of the folks who, of course, couldn't be here because they're working either across the street or in community. So really appreciate the work you guys are doing. Also want to thank you for the continued partnership at looking at how we activate vacant and blighted properties, particularly in District 4. Really appreciated the meeting yesterday to make something happen, and not even short-term, long-term projects, which is really exciting to start thinking outside the box. So I applaud your team and partnership for that, as well as the Four Corners and just pulling in our state delegation and having a robust conversation around the parcels there. So thank you for that as well. Just some questions on the intergenerational housing piece that came up, which is really exciting. I know folks have been talking about that for some time, including Dorchester, Mattapan, a lot of folks who don't necessarily want to move into a senior home or assisted living, but want a sense of a community with some younger folks. So I'm curious, is there going to be a process around that? What will that look like to try to scale that up? Because that's really exciting.
It is very exciting, and it was, the pilot was successful enough that we said, there's something here, let's scale. So in the budget, there's $100,000 that we would RFP, because there's Nesterly, which we've all, grown to really respect, but there's other platforms as well. And so we'd be looking for a nonprofit to team up with us as a partner, but really make the matches between the students and the elderly, work out the agreements, do the screening, et cetera. So that $100,000 in the budget, they would have to leverage other additional money, but it would allow us to say, not hire, but contract with a good nonprofit to really do this service citywide. And it's, the stories that we've heard have been fabulous. Elderly person will get additional revenue from a graduate student. Sometimes they work out arrangements where the rent is reduced because of shoveling or grocery shopping or other things. The companions, friendships develop. And so we've got a lot of elderly people in very large homes with lots of space. And not everybody's wants to do this, but there is a cohort of elderly people that see the benefit. And it's good for our students as well. So I would love to see hundreds of these matches made.
No, that's great, whether it's staying in their homes or looking at even projects that you could create intergenerational housing. I know there's a small organization run by, frankly, a person of color that is running a development project. I believe actually it's in Roxbury. Developing a building for intergenerational housing, and so looking at having conversations about how we turn some of our development projects. So we'll continue.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you meant the home share. But
no, I do both.
Both,
so
yes.
Both get to this theme of intergenerational housing, whether you're doing it in someone's existing home or folks who want to stay in community, maybe move out of their home into a new building that's been developed with the theme of intergenerational housing.
Yeah.
So came across someone who is sort of doing that on a very small scale, but can continue that conversation, particularly as we look at how we activate some of these lots.
Yeah.
So it's just.
I would
once again,
love to meet with
kudos.
that person if
Yeah.
you want to bring us together. I really like intergenerational. I think, I don't know, you go to other countries and you just see it's just there's more intergenerational activities, social and educational, and I think we need to do a better job in our neighborhood. So I would love to meet with that person, Counselor.
That's great, and we'll continue that for sure. We used to get an abandoned property rehab grant from the AG. I want to say back in, I think at 2010 or some years. It then ended in 2014. I was just trying to see if that program, if it was effective, what the resources were used for. If not, we can follow up offline.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
conversation that
I'd have
came
to
up.
do some research on that. I know we get foreclosure prevention grants right from the AG's office that we just received. It was 160, 170,000, and we'll put that out for use. But I'm not aware of the 2010 grant, but I can research it.
Okay. And this, the money that we do get, the 170, how do we use that? And do you find it, obviously, those resources to be effective? And
So we put
What's the
a goodly
impact?
amount of money every year into foreclosure prevention. We do it ourselves. We have our own staff that are very, very skilled working with banks and mortgage companies. We also contract with nonprofits. And there's very few foreclosures right now in the city. I mean, if you got into trouble, you can sell your property. But still, we have seen, we've gotten very organized. And every time we see a notice in the paper, foreclosure notice, we're reaching out to that, if it's a homeowner, reaching out to the homeowner to see how we can help and how we can team them up. So I want to say, and I'll get you the exact number, I think last year there were 50 foreclosures, homeowners that foreclosed, down from thousands in, the 2009, 2010. So it's for a city this size, it's a small number.
very helpful. I can wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 50 foreclosures last year?
50 foreclosures, Maureen? 50 foreclosures? Yeah,
And-
50.
And throughout the city, or were they concentrated?
I can get you that.
Yeah,
I
maybe-
will.
maybe,
I will. Yep.
So Sheila, you hit, and pretty impressive, 125 million towards housing. Couple things. How long can we sustain that commitment, and what does that commitment look like in previous years? So 3 years ago, was it 75 million, or do you have a sense of the last couple of years and what you think the next couple of years will be?
I'm going to give a general, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rick Wilson, who looks at every dime every year. But we are asking for more money in the operating budget this year. So that's a 45% increase. So that's great. CPA has been a real boost, and thank you all for helping.
So is this 125 include
Include CPA.
Okay.
And
Is this the, sorry to keep cutting
No,
you
please,
off,
it's
but
fine.
it's the 125 million, the city all in, so all parts that we have, this is 125 million.
This is money that I'm counting on for D&D's budget next year, and that doesn't take all of the CPA money.
Okay.
I'm assuming our base budget's 105, and then I'm hoping to get $10 million in linkage, but that's a separate set of approvals, and $10 million in CPA, about 50%. That's an estimate. It would require your approval. So I'm saying the budget next year will be about $125 million.
All going towards housing, but
Housing and housing programs.
Not necessarily building housing, just housing programs.
That's correct. There's about $60 million that we will use in next year's budget for the production and preservation of housing, physical, bricks and mortar.
Okay.
And then the others are housing programs. Do you have any comment on years past?
Yeah, years past, and what do you think it'll look like in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think if you look back to where we were, we've done a kind of a look back of FY 2015. And really interesting comparison. Our city funding for DND programs, including housing and community development and homelessness, we were at 20 million in FY20. In FY15, we're at 10 million. So the city investment in housing and housing programs has doubled over that period, which is great to see. City external sources like HUD grants have been flat or declining for the most part. I would expect on the external side, it seems like things have kind of leveled off every year. The past few years, President Trump has proposed eliminating CDBG and home and a lot of our federal sources. Congress has been able to beat that back, and we've retained our federal funding, which is great. And on the city side, I think our understanding and our expectation is that we're going to have this level of commitment going forward. I think the investment that we're seeing from the increase in the room occupancy tax that's proposed in this budget, we've been that's been committed to housing going forward. Mm-hmm. So and on our the linkage and IDP collections. The past few years have been really banner years. I've seen a lot of revenue from those programs. I think some of the proposals.
And you seeing any trends in that money, the IDP money, and the?
I think this year we've already collected over $20 million in IDP funding this year, so it's been another great year in IDP collections. Last year we were at about 16 million, the year before that 24, and then 21 the year before that. So it's been pretty steady, 15
And
to 20 million.
Does that look like it's going to continue?
Yeah, I think we try to be a little conservative, so as Sheila said, 10 million for next year. I would bet that it comes in higher than that, but we never want to count, we don't want to estimate.
That's always a good rule.
Yeah, yeah. So I would actually expect that number's probably going to go up, and I think the same for linkage. I think we go into the year we don't want to be too aggressive in what we're assuming, and then what we've seen in recent years is that at the end of the day, it actually ends up looking better than we expected.
Good. Sheila, one of my favorite programs of yours is the NHI. Can you give us Neighborhood Housing Initiative? Yeah, NHI. Can you give me an update on that? Are we still doing that? Are there lots going out for bid, or
We are doing it, and I will give you I will get you a report on how many units have been created and where they've been created. I don't know, Rick, if you have that. But, so we saw, about 12 months ago, no surprise, and I was talking to Councilor Campbell about this, of lots on Gooddale Road in her district, we started to all of a sudden see this lovely program that had fairly reasonable construction costs go through the roof. Nobody could make the numbers work. These small contractors were coming in with big increases.
Because of what happened in the construction industry in the last 2 years.
Yes, and these are small shops, non-union. They all of a sudden they couldn't make the numbers work. So staff have been working for the last 2 months looking at our designs, and they're beautiful homes. They're little, maybe we have too many bays, maybe we have too many roof pitches, maybe we need to simplify. So we've started working with our architects to see if we can simplify the design, still have a high-quality home.
Yeah.
Look at the size of the homes. Can we make them a bit smaller, a bit tighter, more efficient? So we're starting to look at the designs and other things to see if we can't bring the cost down, because we don't want to stop the program. It's a fabulous program. Neighborhoods love this program.
Yeah.
I've been to a lot of community meetings in my career, and these are the best. People are excited about nice, pretty new homes that are affordable home ownership opportunities. So we're hoping that we can conclude our work in the next, 3-4 weeks, figure out if we can get the numbers down, and then start up anew.
Is there any appetite for the same sort of program but larger buildings? 10 units, 12 units, 15 units?
Like affordable condominiums, or is that what you're?
Well, no, but building, yeah, maybe it's condominiums or the development. I think maybe more density might help us to bring that cost down. Can I have one more question?
Sure.
Thank you, everybody. Rick, I think this is for you. 56200 line, special appropriations, what is that?
Yeah, so the special appropriation is our Housing 2030 special appropriation. So I can kind of give you a quick summary of what that funds. So that the total there is $13 million, and that includes about $4 million of that goes to our home center programs. In general, this funding is used for programs that are not eligible for our federal grants like CDBG and home. So it's our middle income programs like home buyer down payment assistance. So $4 million for home center programs, $7 million for housing production and preservation is funded out of that, and that includes the $4 million that we're getting in FY20 or hopefully getting in FY20 with your approval for permanent supportive housing. $1 million for homelessness programs like our rapid rehousing program that Lila oversees. And $1 million in housing stability.
So that's all our money, not external funds going towards our programs.
Those are general fund dollars. I think, initially it used to be called Leading the Way, and that was tied to property sales. And then when Mayor Walsh came into office, he kind of, with the housing plan, we repositioned it, rebranded it as the Housing 2030 Fund, and that's what that is. And that's the source that really has grown over the past 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait for the second round.
Thank you. Councilor Janey?
Mr. Chair, and many thanks to the panel for all of your good work. If you recall, Chief Dillon, at the hearing that Councilor Edwards and I had on our transfer fee proposal, maybe 3 weeks ago, I asked a question about what the need was. What is the need in terms of the number of units, and what is the need in terms of the amount of money, in terms of dollars? And at that time, you didn't have a number, so I'm hopeful that you have something today.
We do. I would never come back before you without it. So looking at the number of, let me just find it. Looking at the number of there's a lot of ways to look at this number, but what we did, if this doesn't satisfy, we can certainly cut it and slice it in a different way. But there's 31,000 low-income households making $50,000 or less that are severely rent burdened. And to me, there's other housing need. People want to buy a home, it's too expensive. Millennials are moving in and they're paying 41% of their income. You know, there's lots of situations out there. But when you really think about the one that sort of makes us all, kind of tugs at us, is that I think the 31 households that are making less than $50,000, they're paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. So it's 31,811 of those households. Now, we could solve it if we had resources. We could. We looked at different ways, just to do the math. So depending on what the solution is, do we build a unit for all of those families? Do we try to buy the unit that they're living in and deed restrict it? Do we give them all a voucher? The cost is somewhere between $7 and $17 billion.
How much?
$7 to $17 billion. So it's worth knowing and it's worth reminding, but it's a staggering amount of money.
Thank you. In terms of the IDP, I know Councilor Baker raised this just a minute ago. I noticed a decrease in the line item here. Is that because you're being conservative with your estimate?
Yeah, and that what's in the budget is actually what we plan on kind of committing next year. It's not what we expect to collect. So it's a little bit of a apples to oranges, I guess, compared to what I was just referencing earlier. But we are collecting money all the time, and then we're awarding projects based on when we think things are going to come online and when they're applying for our funding in our affordable housing funding rounds.
Right.
So it's not a decrease.
Okay. In terms of the calls that come to my office, many are around displacement due to whether it's an actual eviction, the tenant has to move for whatever reasons. You mentioned in your opening, I think, 2,800 people that were getting some sort of support or service from your office around evictions or displacement. Do you have that data by neighborhood, by zip code, by city council district?
I believe so. I don't have it with me, but we do write down neighborhoods. So let me see what we have.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand where we're really seeing this crunch in terms of displacement throughout the city. And I know many of the neighborhoods that we represent as district councilors are feeling it, but to have that clear data in front of us, I think would be helpful. In terms of...
I should mention, if I could just say one thing. We are very close to getting approval from the state that would allow us, as new units come online, this is fairly new and fairly exciting. They haven't signed off yet, but we're having very good conversations with them, that when we create new affordable units, that we could prioritize a good percentage of the units for low-income households that can show that they are rent burdened. And we've wanted that for a long time because, it's very costly to build new affordable housing. And then while everybody's deserving, really who we need to serve are those that are facing displacement. So I think that would help us a lot. I just wanted to throw that in, just came to me. But it would be a good piece of the puzzle to have.
I agree. I think that's important. In terms of the money that you spend, I think just yesterday or earlier this week, or last week, I guess it was, Councilman Wu and I had our hearing on the city's spend, and as I'm sure you know, the city spends millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and very little is getting to businesses owned by local residents, people of color, or women. What is it that your office is doing to increase that figure in terms of making sure more of the city's money, which is the taxpayers' money, it's our money that we're spending, just to be clear, to make sure more of that's getting into the hands of local business and businesses owned by women and people of color?
So I want to talk about two things. That is a very important issue to us as well, Councilor. So I want to give you our numbers, because we looked up our activity, and then if Donald wants to talk a little bit about his outreach, and then I want to talk about Dudley. We looked at the operating money that we have, and that we're spending on contracts. And while a lot of our money in contracts go to nonprofits, some of the money is going to for-profits. So the for-profit breakdown, we spent $866,000. Okay, it's not a massive amount of money, but these are folks that are cleaning lots and tree, pruning and plumbers and that kind of thing. And 38.61% went to businesses that were either women or minority owned. So that number is 38.61%, or $334,000.
In terms of the landscaping contracts?
Yeah, we can get you a list, but it's landscape, it's, small businesses. And then we, as you know, because you've been following this very closely, we have changed our RFPs, and we put out land and buildings for development, and really requiring development teams to be more representative of our neighborhoods. And I think the first big push was the Dudley RFPs, the 4 we put out, and I think the results are really encouraging. We really are seeing very integrated teams. We're seeing diversity in ownership. Always, we have construction hours, but we're really seeing minority businesses being hired to do those developments. So we're working really hard on it, but I do want to give Donald a chance just to talk about some of the outreach he's doing for some of these contracts.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning, councilors, or afternoon at this point. This is a very sensitive topic for me, as my team goes out to identify folks to work with us. We have great as-needed contracts. I've gone through a number of outreach efforts, most recently in partnership with the Office of Economic Development and Small Business, where we identified a time in which we needed to create a model that will allow for teams to come together. And so a few years back, we hosted a joint venture conference. And so that allowed folks to come in literally at their position and to come together and potentially respond to a request for a proposal for us. A lot of that outreach that was done to sort of focus on that, we've been able to build on it. And so OED and the Office of Economic Development has really run with this series of workshops. That was something that we partnered in very early. Myself, my teams, we go out and we see the small GC, we see the small painter, we see the small fence contractor. And my team is very much tasked with identifying folks that are locally based to respond. We provide the technical assistance. We walk them through a process by which we want them to become certified in the city, to understand that these opportunities are very real. The challenging aspect, though, and to look at it, is sometimes folks are not well positioned to take on some of the projects. And so in order for us to get them ready for that, we want them to engage with the Office of Small Business to give them those said tools so that they can, in turn, respond. Our outreach is every day, all day. I do it on the weekends. My staff does the same thing. But what we're doing is we're encouraging folks as we meet them to come to us, to meet with us, to understand their skill set, but then to also walk them down to OED, again, because that's where the technical piece is going to come in. As Chief mentioned, the diversity and inclusion language. I was so excited to get that language out on the first RFP.
I was very excited
when we did that on Blue Hill Avenue.
Exactly.
That was something that I felt, we could, toot our horn too. And I think that the minority development community understood that we're now ready to make this jump. We're really wanting to broaden and open up the playing field. So we do quite a bit of outreach, and I know I've spoken to a number of the city councilors here and said, please, if there were your constituent base is reaching out to you and saying that they cannot access opportunities with the city, to have them come see me or members of my team, because we understand how to assist them with getting through the process.
Thank you. And I'll
Thank
wait
you.
for the next round.
Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. I want to say a couple things before I start with my questions. If you hadn't heard it today, to the folks at DND, I wanted to say thank you for your work, for how hard you're working, for the folks in Boston. I was just thinking of all the areas that DND touches, and I just was writing them down. So if you want to become a homeowner, if your house is in foreclosure, if you don't have a house, if you're homeless, if you want to build in Boston, if you want some land in Boston or are dealing with land in Boston, if your house is caught on fire, if you are in a deed-restricted unit, all aspects of living, DND is touching. And I'm not saying that because I had the honor to work with, be mentored by, patiently by some folks in this room. I just know what it's like to be in the trenches, and a lot of people don't understand. It's not a 9-to-5 job. when you're working in housing and when you're dealing with the kind of crisis that we see. And so I wanted to say thank you, and I hope that when you're seeing or hearing the questions from me or the ideas and proposals that come from my team, in many cases that's a reflection of the education I got from you and what you were able to help me become. So I wanted to say thank you so much. So just going into a couple things, I wanted to do some check-ins about where we are in housing in terms of numbers. If you don't have them, we could just follow up. But right now, could you tell us generally how are the rents doing in Boston?
How rents are doing?
Yeah, they're stabilizing, are they going up, are they going down?
So last year, 17 over 18, we saw roughly a 3% increase in rents. Okay. So not bad. They're still unaffordable to too many. Let me get you those rents. So existing, the median weighted average rent was 23.88. So that's looking at zeros, ones, twos, and threes. But just say, let's look at twos. So 2,500 in 18 compared to 2,452 in 17. So existing properties, older properties, we saw a 2.7% increase. So when you look at the new development and including the older stock, 3.3% increase. The first quarter showed the same, that rents were not increasing more than 2-3%, and so we're waiting with bated breath for quarter two end.
Is our goal right now really just trying to get the increases to stop? Would that be a realistic goal?
My goal would be to not have the market crash, because that doesn't do.
That's mine too.
I know that. I know that. What I would like to see is people continue to develop, because I think we do have a supply issue. Mm-hmm. I would like to continue to see the new supply take the pressure off the older housing stock, and I would like to see the older rents go down.
Okay. So again, just checking in generally where we are. I know I'm going to bring up IDP, but in general, I know one of the biggest concerns I've heard about IDP and what we hope is on the table when we're looking at it is the fact that because it only really hits at 10 units and higher, I'm wondering if we're seeing an increase in development of 7, 8, and 9 unit buildings to avoid having to deal with IDP altogether. So you may not have that number now, but I'm just curious, and from 2015 to about now, so in the 3 years that we've done IDP or changed it, what increase is there for 7, 8s, and 9s in Boston?
Yeah, I don't have that data. We can get that for you, though, but certainly that is the perception, that there's more 8s and 9s, and this, people are speculating that it's because people don't want to trigger IDP. I know that the BPDA, Tim Davis, is looking at if some of those developments also could contribute in some way. So I think that is going to be part of the discussion. There's certainly, I don't want to say that there is any decisions made on that, because that will be a discussion we have to have with the mayor and advocates and developers and all of the rest. But I think there is the feeling that there's too many developments at the 8 and 9 units, and they should be contributing.
Okay. Again, in a general check-in, home ownership. So, MAHA has the aggressive, I would say, wonderful goal, actually, of trying to get 1,000 new homeowners. Yep. And in general, I know that you graduated 1,300 folks, or DND did. How many of those are becoming homeowners? How many are not? I'm sure the market has a great deal to do with that. Yeah. But
the market's tough, and we think about this all the time. We are, the more we can build affordable home ownership, the better off we will be, but not everybody wants to buy a deed-restricted unit. And we understand that. So we still are working with families that want to buy in less expensive parts of the city. We have signed on to the MAHA goal of 1,000 new homeowners. So Maureen Flynn and I have been working with banks and Mass Housing to see if we can develop a less expensive mortgage product. And we're very excited that the CPA, this last round, made an award of $3.8 million for larger down payments. So if we could team that up with a more aggressive mortgage product, then people can buy more house. So we're modeling that right now, counselors. So we're hoping that somewhere in there is a secret sauce that gets more people into homes.
And just before I add it into, I think, some of that perspective is also redefining what is ownership. So looking at some cooperative, looking at ways in which folks can co-own as well might also be helpful towards that goal. I'm hoping that that's also on the table.
Agree. We haven't seen co-op development that much in Boston at all, but we are very excited to, one of the developers selected on a Highland Park piece of real estate that we put out is going to do a cooperative, which is terrific. We're really excited about that because we haven't seen that in a while. We're also looking at we're scheduling meetings with nonprofits in England, the United Kingdom, to look at partial ownership. Don't fully understand it, but we're looking at that as well. So yeah, any model. We're open to any ideas because it's not just about owning a fee simple home outright. There's lots of other ways that people can have housing security and build equity.
Great. We'll wait for the
Thanks.
next one.
Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sheila, and to your entire team, especially Lila and Jim Green, who, I don't know, actually.
He is here.
Jim's here. Hi, Jim. For all of your work around supporting our homeless individuals and certainly our homeless families and youth. Can we talk a little bit about the $5 million investment that's going to focus on ending chronic and youth homelessness?
Yeah, sure. So I can take one piece and then want to do the million. So the $5 million is a reoccurring source coming from hotel tax, and we are going to earmark it, 4 million of it, 4 million of it, 5, yes. 4 million of it to build permanent supportive housing. So we are hoping to identify each and every year a new supportive housing project.
So that those units will be additional units on the market? We're not looking to convert existing into supportive permanent?
It would be the first two projects that we're sort of have targeted, although people would have to apply for the funding, would be new construction, new units. What we have found in working with all of our nonprofit partners is that we don't have enough supportive housing for people who really can't live independently. And while we've housed a lot of homeless individuals and families in properties and brought supportive services to them, sometimes that makes perfect sense. Sometimes people need 24/7 care, oversight, support. So we need more of that. People that really have a lot of barriers to living independently. So that's what we really want to focus on first. I'll turn it over to Lila on the $1 million for youth homelessness.
Right, so 4 is being targeted to build permanent supportive housing or create permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless individuals. And then 1 million, we're dedicating to ending youth homelessness. So as you know, and you've been a leader in this effort, as have your staff, the city and our community has engaged in a planning process around ending youth homelessness over the last year, almost a year and a half now. And then in July, we were awarded $4.9 million for a 2-year grant to support the housing interventions related to ending youth homelessness. But and that's coming from HUD, so those dollars really have to be dedicated to housing. But what I've learned over the course of this process is that ending youth homelessness is really not just about housing, it's also about creating opportunities. So the idea with this $1 million is it's more flexible, and we'll be able to look at the strategic plan that will be released in the next month, and pay for some of those other pieces that we can't use the federal funding for. So to pay for employment programs, to pay for training, for education, in some cases perhaps homelessness prevention among youth and young adults, and really make sure that we have a full safety net, a full range of interventions that are helping youth and young adults who are experiencing homelessness, exit homelessness, and prevent homelessness, among others.
And then how are we identifying who the youth will be in particular? And then also, if you could just talk a little bit about family homelessness and how are we looking to create units that could house families? When we talk about individuals, we talk about youth, we're talking about small units. Families obviously need a much different housing stock, and we know that we have 4,200 students at least in the Boston Public Schools experiencing homelessness. The majority of those kids are part of a family unit, few are unaccompanied. So if you could just talk a little bit about that quickly. And did I get a bell?
No.
No, great.
Sure. And I should add that when we're talking about homelessness among youth and young adults, that includes youth and young adults who are parenting. So some of those households are families. It's really defined as anyone who head of household is under 25 years old. So in terms of identification of young people experiencing homelessness, that's actually something we want to improve, and that's in the strategic plan is finding strategies to improve identification. We certainly are aware through our data collection, we're aware of the youth and young adults who are already in the very standard homeless response system. So if they're living in shelter or having contacts with street outreach, we have the data, and we have their ages if they disclose that. We are, BPS has been part of this effort, so we're working with BPS and other systems, Department of Children and Families, criminal justice systems, to think about how to identify who in their systems are actually experiencing homelessness. And that's more of a public health type approach, is how do you identify a population within a very broad context. So we're looking at strategies to do that. Yes. Yes. So in terms of homeless families who are maybe not fitting that age category, and many families experiencing homelessness do have a young head of household, but not all by any means. So we have had on the books, and Councilor, I'm sure you're familiar with the policy that we call the set-aside, homeless set-aside policy. So every development that has more than 10 units, I believe, in the city of Boston, and this has been in place since the late 90s, every development has to set aside 10, every affordable development that has more than 10 units has to set aside 10% at least of those units for homeless households. And the unit breakdown is supposed to mirror whatever the composition of units are in that development. So if it's a development with all 3 bedrooms, then 10%, those 10% that are set aside for households experiencing homelessness should also be 3 bedrooms.
What I would say, though, is we know, and I know that my time is up, a lot of what is being built in the city is not 3 bedrooms, and the data from the state that's coming in is showing that families experiencing homelessness are growing in size, that there are more and more children which do require larger units. Yeah. So what I'd like to see is, and I applaud this work, I think it's incredible, the HUD money, the additional investment from the occupancy tax, I think it's great, and I celebrate it and applaud it. But I also think that we continue to leave behind some of the larger sized units that could house our families here in the city of Boston. Yeah. My time's up.
I just have to add, though, and I know you know this, everything we tell everybody here probably you already know, but we were very happy that the BHA was able to secure those 1,000 vouchers, and they are targeting families that have been in the shelter system the longest. So they are families that have had lots of obstacles, including family sizes. Now, and you asked me this question the other day, and I don't have an answer yet, but I reached out to the BHA. We've got to figure out how we're supporting those to find a unit in a very tight market.
My question the other day was where we have those vouchers, that's exciting, again, but where are the units?
Yeah. So.
And I do have the breakdown of the homeless set-asides.
You're talking now.
It's, sorry.
So much to say.
I just want to, just because I have the numbers in front of me, 697 of the homeless set-asides are 2-bedroom or larger units. I don't have breakdown more granular than that, but we can get it. So 697 are 2-bedroom or larger, and then in the pipeline, there's 144 more that are 2-bedroom or larger.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Chief, and
Good afternoon.
Team, I appreciate your incredible work. I think I misspoke at our hearing on Age Strong Boston, where I think I said that Commissioner Shea was the longest-serving commissioner, but you are the longest-serving chief because you've been here, you predate me.
I've been at the city and state for quite a while, but I've been in this role now for 6 years.
Yes.
In this role for 6 years.
And you're doing a great
And
job.
I'm just old, so.
No, stop it, not at all. But you do remarkable work, and I think it's safe to say that one of the biggest issues we're facing as a city is affordability, is displacement, is the housing crunch. So really appreciate what your team does and the folks sitting behind me. It's really important work. Some brief questions on sort of just housekeeping budget issues. Line 5100 or 51,000, permanent employees increases by 217,000. Are those new positions, or is that sort of collective?
Most of that is going to be collective bargaining increases. We are getting, let's see, one new position, general operating funded position to support our affirmative fair housing marketing program, which we are very excited about in that program. But the rest of it is primarily collective bargaining.
And have you identified someone for that role? You know, I'm curious. I know you can't do it until we actually pass the budget and the money's there, but do you start the process?
We just started the process. Yeah, we've submitted the request to get the position posted, and we're working. Hopefully, it's posted when I get back to my desk.
Great. And line 52,900, and I apologize if you went over this. I did leave for a moment. Contracted services up by about $1.8 million.
So that's all the investments we've been talking about. So the $1 million for homeless youth that Lila talked about, $300,000 from homeless peer navigators, ADU, $650,000. All of that is in that line item.
Good. And then 56,200 special appropriation is a 4.2 million increase. That's CPA.
No, CPA is actually not reflected in our budget. That's kind of off budget, goes through a different process. That 4.275 million is the 4 million that Sheila talked about, the permanent supportive housing investment for the remarkability tax increase. And then the 275,000 is actually just a shift from operating funds to that special appropriation.
Great. And then it looks as though it's pretty level funded because that's the IDP funding has been decreased by about 1.5 million. And then there's some other CDBG's been decreased as well.
Yeah, and the federal funds actually we've had updated information since we submitted our budget. So what's in the budget book is not the latest, greatest information.
Is it better or is it worse?
Well, it's mixed bag. Yeah, mixed bag. Yeah, we found out we got a really small, under $100,000 decrease to our CDBG award this year from HUD. A little bigger decrease in our home funding, which is unfortunate. Those decreases will be offset by the CPA revenue and the IDP revenue and linkage that we're expecting to bring in next year. And then we had some increases in our other federal sources like HAPA and ESG, and well, ESG went down, but HAPA, a few other sources. So all in all, I think it's federal, on the external side, it's more or less, I'd say, level funding. Yeah.
So I can say this, you probably can't, that there's a lot of concern that you have folks running HUD at the federal level who have no clue what they're doing, but it doesn't seem that they've, things seem pretty static from that point of view.
They've tried to reduce it.
Yeah.
The administration every year. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Good that we've been
There
able
is
to
there's a whole new, set of work just trying to maintain the federal resources that you have.
Yeah.
Bob Garrett and his team have, got national partnerships with, lots of very effective groups. But, while you're trying to do the good work, you're also trying to fight and keep the resources that you have.
Yeah. I mean, your workload is doubled, and it shows the incompetence at the federal level. So I'm glad that we have such beyond competence at the local level with your team, Sheila. You mentioned, I think, in your opening remarks, and I want you to just delve in the weeds a little bit more on the great success at the Forbes building and what's happening there, and then how we can sort of expand that at other expiring use, affordable developments.
So we're really excited. In fact, there's a meeting, I think, tomorrow or this week, so I'll get that to you. Great news on the Forbes. The owner has decided that he wants to keep the building affordable. As you know, there's a lot of, it's 170-ish units of housing located in a very desirable part of JP. And a lot of these are low-income elderly folks. Yeah. So I know that you've been really watching this very, very closely. But with state resources, city resources, and some of these new vouchers from the BHA, we're hopeful that we can put a deal together that will make the owner whole, and he will agree to keep the units affordable. And I really want to just credit the HUD Tenant Alliance. Michael Kane is here today in his work with the residents. So really good news. And I was saying to Michael earlier outside, you know, we're really down to two. We're down to the Mercantile, 13As, down to Mercantile and Babcock and Brighton. And the other developments, we have either, you know, figured out a solution or the tenants are going to be safe. But we started with 1,000 units in very strong neighborhoods with a lot of very low-income people. So the work's not over yet, but the Forbes win, it would be one to celebrate.
That was great, absolutely, and great work there, and thank you for mentioning Michael Kane and the incredible work that he does in our neighborhood. It is a wonderful thing. We clearly have a lot more work to do, but that's just great because, as you said, that I think we all feared that was going to be sold, demolished, bulldozed, people would be displaced, and it would just be more luxury condos, but it's going to continue to be a vibrant and diverse, wonderful, safe housing development that we love to support. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Thank you. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Donald, can you talk a little bit about the yard sale? I've had a couple situations where the yard sale, some of the, you know, like people were building in them that were not supposed to build in them. One developer in particular found a loophole. How are we going to deal with that moving forward? And I think on some of the lots it's appropriate to build on. So what does the future look like for the yard sale? Donald or Sheila, whoever.
I'll start it and just, and I'm not an attorney, but you're right that there's some very old, for folks that are watching that don't know what the yard sale program is, many years ago, the city owned a lot more land than we do now, and land was sold, and there are big parcels of land for side yards. And many of these deed restrictions that were put on these parcels were faulty. And my crude understanding is that the obligation went from the owner to the owner, and it didn't go from the city to the owner. So developers are saying, these deed restrictions aren't any good. We're going to build on this. And the only thing that we have is we could keep the deed restriction on the property and we create a cloud to the title, but we don't hold the restriction.
Yeah, that only would help us if they were selling at some point.
So in some cases, we don't think it's appropriate to build. In some cases, we want to hear from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So Donald and his staff have put together a process to do just that. So.
Thank you, Chief. And Council, what we've seen is, you know, initially this was a non-starter, non-conversation. And then we started to see that proposals were coming in to sort of circumvent the restriction by a common sort of attachment, where the restriction is open space to build an addition to your home or parking. And
so that addition can be 4 units?
Right, and so people were literally taking a common breezeway and saying, okay, we're going to throw 3 units here. And so the community, who most of our neighborhood associations know about the program, they knew that these were deed-restricted parcels. And so what we attempted to do was to get a little ahead of it. Mm-hmm. And so when folks were coming in, initially we were saying, no, we're not going to waive those restrictions. Then we started to figure out what sort of leverage. I mean, the city has interest in this, and so what can we use? And so we started to have conversations around, can the city get a unit or more of affordable housing? However, you've got to go through a process. And so our internal workflows from design, underwriting, et cetera. But then also the major issue became, does the community support it? Is there a level of affordability out of that deal that's going to support what the community is asking for? I just had a conversation, and we were working through a process in Fields Corner where the neighbor team supported the development. However, they wanted an additional unit to the original unit. And so there's got to be a simple back and forth, but in understanding that there are some concerns with it, we built in a workflow with the Office of Neighborhood Services, and so that we can get ahead and get to the ZBA date when they're trying to get those approved, right? And so what we're doing is asking that there be a deferral so that development team or individual can come back to D&D, and then we can subsequently have a conversation about the city's interest in that.
Right, that's what I wanted to pick up on that. So at what point do we know, or do you know, that it was a yard sale? Like, is there some sort of trigger in the zoning process, or how do How do you know that one of the city's old lots is trying to be developed on? Now, what's our mechanism?
So, okay, Chief.
Most developers know if there's a deed, even if it's faulty, they know whether there's a deed restriction. We're usually hearing from the developers.
Oh, so they're coming in and saying, can I do this?
Yes.
Right, and so they're coming in, and then also because of part of our process, they know that they have to get in front of those neighborhood associations, and so as that buzz gets around, they're coming to us as well. We're trying to build in some internal workflows in other divisions that may work for this, like if there was a way in which we could have something that showed up at ISD. We can't get involved into their systems, but we're working collectively to try to find a resolve. We're trying to look at our internal system, which we use Salesforce, and maybe is there a way of identifying when new permits are pulled, will it flag those parcels that have parcel IDs that are associated with this list of restrictions?
Is this happening a lot, Donald? Like how many,
No, right now.
can you count it on one hand, or?
Right now, we have been communicating with at least 21 projects. 2 have already canceled. But what I mean by that, people have come in and said, we're interested in doing this, and then we don't hear from them again. So if I could say, because a lot of times this came from.
Is that the homeowner doing
It
that?
started that way. There was a trend where homeowners were coming in because people were getting in their ears saying, boy, you can do this. And then I tell them what it means to become a developer. Like, this is not a simple, I want to build an addition or build a house in that sense. So a number of the folks, they go, you know what? I'm not built for this. And then they're done. It's really the developer type that are trying to get around it.
And you're seeing them connecting on to the families? Like, what if a developer buys a property from a family outright? Is that, so now that developer can potentially go through a process?
It is happening. Developers are buying, or someone will sell their home to one entity, and then they'll sell the side yard to another entity. So yeah, they're often separate sales.
Because what the data also is showing that a number of those homes at some point may have been foreclosed on. And so as the chief was saying, that restriction went with the owner, right? So that house, and so you might have somebody on a parcel, because I've been in communications with a constituent in that sense, she thought she bought the entire, what looks like one lot, but there's actually a deed restricted parcel on that lot.
Yeah, I actually have a yard sale issue that I was into. Someone built a garage on it. The garage was filled with rats, and and then it changed hands, and so it's very, very gray. Sheila, can you talk a little bit about the Office of Housing Stabilization, how they're doing, what's their casework? Oh, okay. Maybe in the next one.
It's busy.
Maybe you can talk about it anyway.
It's very busy. There's, I think, 8 people. We get 100, calls per week. We did contract out with a lot of nonprofits this year, which is going well. So we can refer, households that have specific needs to Hearth that deals with homeless elders, or, Home Start that has a, really good track record on eviction prevention. So we now have a whole stable of nonprofits working with us too. So it's good.
And how many people are in that office?
I want to say 8. I want to say 8 counselors.
Okay.
Is that right? 8.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before I pet, so Donald, was Bradbury Street the first one that we discovered?
Council and I, yes, we work collectively on that.
I thought so, thanks. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much. I just want to pick up where we left off on procurements. So you were mentioning, thank you for your amazing outreach work, but you mentioned, Chief, that the landscaping contracts and other contracts like that were going to local and people of color and women. What percentage would you say were contracts over $100,000 that went to those types of businesses?
Do you have that? We can get that
you
for
can
you
get that
easily.
breakdown.
I don't have that breakdown, so my
Wonderful.
apologies.
No worries. So I'd love the entire breakdown.
Sure.
Just understanding how much was local, how much was people of color, how much was women, and the size of the contract, so that we can understand whether or not, yep.
Can I just want to add something to our outreach. And because we have what we call as-needed contracts, this is, to me, an ideal barrier to entry for some of our smaller contractors to get into the procurement world, so to speak, on the municipal side. And so we've had great success in having those local businesses that would not have had the opportunity to kind of scale up, and that's what we're looking at in here, and coming in, doing your work, your due diligence, growing your business so that you can bid on those larger scale projects. I've had conversations with developers in this space, and so there's a small group, GC types, that really want to get in, but then there's that tier that's above that. And so, some of the work that we have is not fit for them, and so we've talked about, how do we build that up?
Yep. In the contracting world, one of the issues that I've discovered as a challenge for some of the smaller outfits is the back office and making sure that they're getting the support and TA that they need to kind of staff the back office, which many of the smaller ones don't. And so they're falling behind on their reporting. They're getting, into trouble because of that. So that's an issue. But I do want to shift because I know the chair has us on a tight time frame here. I want to thank my colleague for bringing up the IDP issue. Councilor Edwards, my district is just overrun with projects that are at this 8 and 9 unit level. And my constituents have had it up to here. It's just ridiculous. The number of so the existing property may have 2 units, a 2-family house. They want to tear that down, and then they want to build 9 units just under, what would trigger the affordable unit. I would be very much interested in understanding where these 8 and 9 units are all across the city, by neighborhood, by city council district, and very much supportive of a conversation that says, how do we get more out of these units to fund affordable housing? So very much supportive of that.
All right.
Senior housing. Can you talk about the city's efforts around senior housing and housing for other populations like LGBTQ community, housing that is friendly to that group? Tell me where the city is on that. And then I have a question on, just in case my time runs out, I think I better at least put it on the floor. I noticed here in the capital part of your budget something with BHA. And as I visit many of the seniors, many of whom are in BHA housing, that just have a lot of repairs that need to be done. And so, is that your job?
So we're working very closely with the BHA on their portfolio. So as they identify properties that really they don't have the federal resources for, we're helping fund those developments out of our budget. So they have a pipeline. We meet on it weekly, and we're working with the BHA. Yep. So they've identified 4,500 units of housing that needs renovation.
Yes, 4,500 units?
4,500 units, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And so still on the senior and the
yes.
LGBTQ,
so
but I'm going to...
The senior housing, in all of our with the mayor's housing plan, we were making great progress on all of our measures. Senior housing was always lagging. And we've permitted, since the start of the plan, 400 units, let's say, of low-income senior housing. And we're not satisfied with that, so we've started to put out a lot of our land parcels for senior housing. So I just want to, so some of the ones that we've identified that we're moving forward is O'Connor Way is under construction in South Boston. Two Life Communities in Brighton just finished theirs. We put out land in Four Corners for Hearth to do a development. 41 North Margin, we're going to fund. That wasn't our land or building, but we helped facilitate a conversation with the Knights. 150 River Street, we put that land out for senior housing. Grace Apartments, we're funding in East Boston. And so it goes. I find that we have to be very, very intentional if we want to get a pipeline of senior housing. I don't know why that is. It's easy to cite. The need is great. There's no problem with rent up, et cetera. So, but it has taken city intervention to get a healthy pipeline, Councilor.
Thank you so much. So yes, intentionality, very important to get the desired result for anything. You have to be intentional about it, even though the need is great. So thank you for your efforts there. One last question, Mr. Chair, if you'll indulge me. I'm interested in understanding the deed-restricted housing throughout the city by neighborhood and by city council district. Sure. And I think for Roxbury, that percentage is what, 70%? Or is that just the Dudley Square area?
It's much higher. So in the last year, we have cataloged every affordable housing unit that we had by neighborhood. We didn't do it by city council district. We might be able to, but certainly by neighborhood. How many units we have, their affordability levels, which is always of great interest. I want to say Roxbury was, Bob Garrett, do you know? Off the top, it's a high percentage. I want to say it's over 40%.
So
but
you
I want
could
to
get that to me. That would be
Yes.
helpful. And then what the plans are to just make sure that we are being equitable in terms of the distribution. So just as we say, our surrounding neighbors, surrounding towns need to do their fair share. I think it's important that we make sure that we have equity throughout our city and that there's access to affordable housing throughout the city and that it's not just concentrated in certain neighborhoods, but that we have it throughout. So I'd be interested in, one, understanding what the current landscape looks like, and then two, what the plans are to get us toward greater equity. Thank you,
Very
Mr.
good.
Chair.
It's a good question. Thank you.
Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. So just following up, I had a couple more check-in questions. In terms of the rate of condo conversions, are you seeing an increase? I know we just put out there to renew it, and I think that's something we all support, is just renewing the condo conversion ordinance. And I didn't know if you had seen an increase in the amount of condo conversions.
I didn't bring that with us. We are tracking it. It's been fairly steady for the last several years. It's still too many, but I can get you that number. We do have it. I just didn't bring it with us, Councilor.
Okay. So one of the things I'm really excited about is the use of future funds from the occupancy tax to help with housing. And so one of the other ideas we have proposed is the use of other future funds tax revenue from luxury buildings to come online. To use some of that or dedicate a certain percentage, again, for housing preservation, whether it's for the 13A buildings or helping to buy down affordability. And I was wondering if this, we would love for it to be a budget priority to look at that for this year. I'm just curious if you had the opportunity to look at that and assess that.
Oh, we've looked at it a great deal. So the conversations are ongoing. We have been looking at the proposal that you put forward and others, looking at the state bills. I must say, we are still talking about it internally. Our priority has been increasing CPA at the state, getting linkage and IDP situated and increased if we can, but we are looking at it still.
Right, because this, unlike the state bills or the other home rules or the transfer fee, this is literally just the city looking at income to come in and with luxury buildings that are still yet to be built and permitted, and then just segmenting a certain amount of it for housing. So I think it would actually be really just a prioritization in a future budget, ideally this one, but to just simply say a certain percentage of luxury housing will permanently pay for affordable housing. I want to move to the recent announcement for the vouchers, the 1,000 vouchers.
Yes.
Just trying to confirm, they are 1,000 units to be administered by BHA?
Yes.
Only?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're putting some of that out for RFP to help the 13As, and others are being really targeted for homeless families.
Right. And so, again, I think one of the things we really want to also figure out is a systemic way to deal, not just with 13A, the individuals, and making sure they have a soft landing, and ideally a landing in Boston. I've heard there could be an increase, for example, in the vouchers. We'll wait to see how that happens. But how we can make sure that those units in downtown buildings, the 3 bedrooms that are affordable, that if we don't fight to preserve them, we're losing the entire unit. So, in the Mercantile and other places, and I know it's extremely hard with a lot of, if the owner doesn't prioritize that. But I think that's something also that we want to make sure we're still fighting for, is the actual affordable units. When it comes to the BHA, again, another great announcement was the capital that we're going to be bonding for as a capital investment for the Bunker Hill development.
Yes, $30 million.
$30 million so far. And I do understand that that's really going to be the way in which a lot of our, because we don't have a federal partner right now, a lot of our housing's going to be, public housing's going to be developed that way. I've been a proponent, and I believe in bonding. I think that we fought really hard to have this triple bond rating. I think we should use it. I'm wondering if there's any way beyond BHA for other housing programs to also look at bonding at scale. Have you thought about that and using some more of that in DND's budget?
We haven't looked at that, but we can certainly look at it. You mean just bond against the future for money now that we can use
For our projects,
for housing?
yeah, and I am cognizant of the fact I don't necessarily want to bond in general development. I don't really want private actors to have access to city credit. I do want to look at the public, our projects, our deed restricted projects, but I think BHA is a wonderful caretaker of that. They're only public housing, but I think we should be looking at other projects as well. So I hope in future budgets that bonding might be part of the conversation for DND.
Okay.
Also, we brought up, and I just want to confirm, you said it, I believe, in Roxbury, just wanted to reiterate it. When it comes to city land, we do not sell, or we do.
When you say sell, what do you?
Well, for some of the projects, I think in Dudley, we were looking at projects where there were being development going on city land. I understood that we had long-term leases, that we weren't ultimately selling the land and giving it to private developers, that we were maintaining ownership.
We do both. More often than not, we do sell.
Okay.
Yep, more often than not. It makes for less complicated development, although if we think there is a good reason to have a lease, a long-term lease, that people can, borrow against, that's always an option. There is, on the Dudley parcels, I know especially the one that's between the police station and the library, we're going to do a long-term lease just because it's in between two city assets, and we thought better to lease than to sell.
Okay.
Thanks. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you. I'll try to go quick through my questions here. You talked, Chief Dillon, earlier about the Metro Mayor's effort in the multi-family housing. Do you have any of the results or any of the data on what's happened since the Metro Mayors came together? What are people building or growing community by community?
Yeah, I know our number. I don't know if I have a total, and I was just at MAPC a couple of days ago. Let me get that for you. I know that Quincy, the Cambridge, Somerville, Quincy, and Braintree have very, very healthy pipelines of multifamily housing. But let me get you the exact number from MAPC.
Great, that'd be great, thank you. And then also, if we could also get the number of affordables within that, because I know that's one of the more challenging pieces.
Yes.
So we want to know that they are not just taking photos and presenting themselves as the Metro Mayors, and they've got this aggressive goal for affordable and more units in the region, but they're actually following through with that commitment. I know that we are doing we're doing a really good job here in Boston. And I don't know whether this came up earlier in this hearing, but can we talk a little bit about the vacant affordable units, the lottery, and how many occupiable affordable units do we have right now that are vacant? And what's that sort of pipeline look like going forward?
I'm going to hand this over to Rick, who's been overseeing that, and I will mention, and he'll mention that in this year's budget, we are asking for an additional staff person because the volume is so great.
Great.
And of all the stuff I put in this binder, the one thing I forgot to include was where we are, the status on the vacant occupied units. So we'll have to get that to you offline. But I think there's a lot of activity going on in this area right now. Sheila mentioned, I mean, the volume of projects that we have, affordable housing is fantastic, but it is putting a strain on our resources in this area. I think the last I looked, there were 56 projects in some stage of from marketing plan review all the way through lotteries, having their going through with their lotteries. So there's an incredible amount of volume, which is great. We're getting an extra staff person. We're also
and what will be the role of that extra staff person?
So the goal is we have one person whose primary job it is to review the plans, work with the developers and the marketing agents on the plans and all of their compliance submissions. But she is also responsible for handling all the constituent inquiries that come in, which is a lot, and helping to prepare for the lotteries. So this is a program assistant position that could do more of the support tasks and take the pressure off of her, so that she can focus on reviewing plans and making sure the plans are getting reviewed, and compliance submissions like applicant logs and lottery results are getting reviewed timely. We know it's not happening as fast as any of us would like, and we're working hard to fix that. We have a new IT director who's focusing on this as well, and we just hired a project manager to work on both the Fair Housing Marketing Program and our MetroList platform as well to make improvements in both of those areas. So we're bringing them up to speed. We're going to be meeting with we've identified a group of developers and marketing agents that we're going to bring together to help us prioritize and figure out what are the pain points and what are the opportunities to improve. We just talked to the Mass Legal CDCs about this today. Is that what they're called?
Mass Association.
Mass Association of CDCs about this today. So.
And what would be helpful is to know the number of affordables that are occupiable but vacant as of today, and what we have in the pipeline coming online in, I don't know if we want to talk in 6-month period or 12-month period, because we may know both of those numbers, and what sort of investment would we need to really shrink the time that an affordable unit, whether it's rental or an ownership opportunity, is available to be purchased or leased, but not in the hands of someone who is qualified through the lottery system. And I get that the pain points or the delay points are sometimes often with the developer, sometimes with the individuals sort of following up once they are selected in the lottery. But we also know that the delay is internal because of the lack of, I think, staffing and resources on our end.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to give the impression that it's all in the developers, but there is a combination of factors that lead to that, and sometimes we're hearing from developers very late in the process, and they're just starting. So we're trying to make sure that we have a way to be proactive as well and make sure that developers.
Well, I think with the right
and agents are coming to
resources
us.
in your office, we can speed that process up, and that gets the affordable units into the hands of our residents. Doesn't quite help us with the not super affordable units, but at least those, we can get those units occupied. My other question is on artist live and workspace. I know this falls often under the BPDA, but is there any work that your office does around artist live work or artist live space?
So there's great demand for artist live work and artist workspace in the city of Boston. We have put out a couple of parcels of land to encourage, once again, to be intentional, encourage this kind of development. We've got 2 projects that are going to start construction very soon on Terrace Street in Mission Hill, and we have another much larger project that we're doing on Condor Street in East Boston for affordable rental artist live work. So it seems once again that we're not receiving a lot of projects through our funding rounds, people coming forward and saying, we want to develop this. Instead, it helps if we go out and say, we know there's a lot of artists in this neighborhood, and we've heard that there needs to be this kind of housing, and we put out land to encourage it. So we should be looking at, because these 2 have sort of been, we've chosen a developer, they're moving along and getting their approvals, we should start thinking about the pipeline and what's next. Thank you for the reminder. That's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on one of my last questions. I heard your response, I think, on senior housing, but not so much on the LGBTQ housing.
So especially LGBT-friendly senior housing, which there's been some great developments in other cities, and shame on us that we haven't done one yet. There is great interest in a site in Hyde Park, and for this type of development. There's a community meeting May 16th in the upcoming weeks. And we're at the high school, the vacant high school there. We're not moving until we hear from the neighborhood and the community, although we've gotten a lot of calls that people are very supportive of that development being senior housing and LGBTQ friendly. So we're encouraged by that. We're interested in that, but we had to hear from the community. But we would like to see that model be developed in the city of Boston.
Can you talk a little bit about affordable home ownership opportunities? And I know you touched upon this in your presentation and in some of the responses to my colleagues, but I'm particularly interested in whether or not that piece of the pie has grown in the last year. Like, are more people able to buy their homes through the city?
Yeah.
Or not, or is it staying steady? Or is
So,
there a decrease?
yeah, I don't have the exact-
And then where it is throughout the city in terms of the mapping by zip code again?
Yeah. I can get you the numbers of where we have affordable home ownership and where we've developed affordable home ownership. We're very interested in doing more. The construction costs, as I had mentioned earlier, they slowed us down some because it was getting very, very expensive. Right now, if we want to build affordable rental housing, we put money in, developers go to the state, they get low-income housing tax credits, they take permanent debt, and we're, not an insignificant, but a small piece of the total funding pie. With home ownership, it's us and the mortgage. So the per unit cost to develop affordable home ownership is a lot for the city of Boston.
What is the per unit?
What's that?
What is the per unit cost?
So say it costs on average $400, $425 to build a unit, sort of a simple unit of home ownership. And a person can support a mortgage or a household of $250 or so. We're putting in, close to $200,000 to create a unit of affordable home ownership.
On top of the 400, so are we talking
No,
600?
it's as part of the 400. So when we fund, I think the average subsidy for an affordable rental unit when we fund is $75,000. So it costs us a lot of money to build affordable home ownership opportunities. We believe we should. We believe that we should be doing a lot of this. We're encouraging the state right now to help us fund. Right now, they're not interested in funding affordable home ownership. But we've been meeting with them and having lots of dialogue. We would like them, because if we're splitting the cost with the state, then we can take our money and it goes much further.
And I would support that.
Great. Okay. We may need you to.
Yeah.
So and they've been really good partners, and we know that there's a lot of affordable home ownership being proposed in the Dudley proposals, all of them. So I've already mentioned to the state that we have these wonderful proposals coming, and they are interested in meeting with us, which is great. So we just need to find other funding sources to help us do more affordable home ownership. CPA is going to be a big help too.
Wonderful. And just in terms of follow-up, the mapping, understanding what the current landscape looks like would be particularly helpful as
I did just flip through 45% of the housing units in Roxbury are deed restricted affordable.
Okay. And when someone owns a house that is deed restricted in the city of Boston, how does what happens with their equity? Like, how does that grow over time? Because it is restricted. So what can a homeowner who gets a deed restricted house, what can they anticipate in terms of being able to build wealth over time?
So most of the restrictions allow for either a 5% appreciation or a 3% appreciation per year, depending on how old the deed restriction is. And at the same time they're getting that appreciation, they're paying down their mortgage. So when households come to us and they're looking for maximum resale prices, they're not seeing the gains that people that own market rate housing, but they're realizing, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. So they're walking away with equity to either, use to move or buy their next home, et cetera. So it's a good program, but like I said in the beginning, it's not for everyone. Not everybody wants to buy a deed-restricted unit, but many do.
It's an important piece of the puzzle.
I totally agree, Counselor. Yes.
Deed-restricted home ownership, market rate home ownership, co-ops, you name it, rentals, it's all a part of the puzzle. Last question, I promise. I am interested if the city has a program to help those who perhaps bought a deed-restricted house 20 years ago, but is interested in getting into the market and getting into a market, what am I trying to say?
Market rate home.
Market rate, thank you.
Market rate home.
Market rate home over time. Is there a program that then helps those who are in the deed-restricted house kind of go from there and get into a market rate house?
So
or no, does that not exist?
Well, there's not a specific program, but they come to us, they say they want to get the maximum resale price, we give it to them, and then we start dialogue with what their plans are, and oftentimes they're looking for advice around mortgage products, et cetera, but they have equity now that they can actually go out and purchase a market rate home, and we see that quite often.
Right. In terms of follow-up, I'd be interested in how many in the deed-restricted homes have stayed in their homes for the life of their loan, I guess it's a 30-year mortgage, just like, okay, versus have then used that as a leverage to get into a market rate house or not?
Yeah, it's good data. We'd have to create it, but let's look at it. It's a good thing to know.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Chair.
Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Just going, I think, back to some of the questions I had on policy. So I'm very excited to know that I think you guys are working on furthering fair housing, and that I have introduced a zoning amendment, for example, and having that directly incorporated into our zoning code. But I wanted to hear about the work that you're doing directly, if there's any updates on furthering fair housing and how that's being incorporated. I think it's great that DND and BHA have both committed to that, despite, I think, the federal government's questioning whether it's still necessary, whether they'll still be part of its enforcement. So I'm curious to hear about your role, or the DND's role in furthering fair housing.
Thank you for reminding us that we need to schedule a follow-up meeting, although I think it is. So, right, as you mentioned, this was a HUD requirement that we were excited about. It was a bit daunting because the format that HUD was giving us was quite burdensome. And then HUD decided that they no longer wanted this exercise. They no longer wanted cities to do these reports. We did agree with the advocates that we would continue the work. And it's been a very good dialogue. I got to credit Bob Garrett in the policy and research team. We've hired Professor Jennings to help us with this work, to write the report and to listen to people's comments. And now we are really going through all of the recommendations with a lot of fair housing advocates and lawyers to agree on what we can do, what we may not be able to do, or might sit someplace else. And so the work is, we wanted to finalize it in April because it was Fair Housing Month. Well, it's May. So I'm hoping really by the end of the fiscal year, early in fiscal year 20, that we'll complete the report.
So that's for those, in layman terms, end of fiscal year's end of June?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's great, because I'm looking forward to hearing how they're incorporating that specifically and making sure that we're going beyond just saying we won't discriminate, but how we're going to promote integrated communities, how we are going to remove obstacles to opportunities. Those are also federal mandates as part of furthering fair housing. So thank you. Sure. I think earlier with Councilor Flynn, you were talking about Chinatown, specifically looking at the row houses. And I've had CPA, I've had land trusts, I've had other groups approach about collective purchasing or trying to get a land trust to be at the table with the developer. And I'm just wondering if this isn't there, we don't have an opportunity looking at IDP, and especially when developers are going to go off-site, and how we can't marry the two together, saying, so if you don't want to have anything slip 45 or in the Eddy in East Boston or whatever the buildings are, and you're going to do your affordable housing off-site under your IDP requirements, do we have a match program? Are we promoting or pushing to land trusts or groups of individuals to make sure that they're getting the buildings or getting things built or helping to purchase buildings?
Yes. I mean, Tim Davis he's the master matchmaker these days. And he did make a match. I got to figure out what happened between Lydia Lowe and a downtown developer. We aren't going to match, though, a developer in East Boston to the row houses unless it's within a half mile or pretty close. Because if you're going to go off-site, the rule is that we want you to stay close to the subject property, so that we use half mile. Sometimes if it's a little over, we'll consider it, but we really like developers that have an obligation to keep it within the general neighborhood. But the row houses are downtown. So while a lot of downtown had already met their obligation, there were a few outstanding that we were trying to make that match. The row houses are so expensive that it is a perfect IDP offsite opportunity. It's perfect.
Since we're on the topic of IDP, a lot of the questions people have is, what is that right balance? And for so many of us, and myself included, that 13% seems too low. Mm-hmm. And while, I know other cities are at 20%, and that might seem too high, I just wanted to walk me through. We have 13% of your 10 units in your building on site. Off-site, it does go up, doesn't it?
18.
18% off-site, and then how much, what is the percentage if you contribute to the Neighborhood Housing Trust?
18.
18%. So is there movement in the other two? Is there at all any thought about movement in the 13%?
So as I mentioned, that the BPDA has hired Landwise to stress the market rate developments, to build a model, to look at all the variables, and to see if more can be extracted. So they're building the model right now. They're having interviews with developers and nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, and advocates. Because some of the advocates have been very skilled at learning the variables and knowing the variables, so they're doing a lot of interviewing, and I think we're going to have results soon. And those results are completely public and very transparent.
Okay. Can I keep
Yeah,
going?
keep going.
Okay. So another thing that we proposed, and while ultimately I believe we've already, the mayor's proposal for linkage, that granted the city more flexibility, is my understanding, right? So it's to be able to turn it up or down at the city level, right? That's been before us.
Exactly right. Right now, we have to, every 3 years,
Go to
tied to this formula, but it would say that if passed here and passed the state, it would allow the city to increase or decrease as it sees fit.
Right, and so right now, we're at $10, I think $1 is for jobs, and 9 something is for housing.
Why don't I have that with me? Yeah, it's about $10 a square foot, and jobs is
Right.
a little under 2.
Right, and I just wanted to, again, understand a little bit more why we aren't at least even saying the words minimum and $10 in a proposal that we would send to the State House. Why we're not putting in some, I certainly want way more than I think the administration's comfortable with at the $24. I'm following the linkage nexus report. So I support that number. But I'm wondering why a number, even if it's the one we're committed to right now, isn't in, or why we won't commit to that.
Yeah. So the logic was that we would, get the approval, get the authority, and at the same time be working with the consultant who's looking at linkage on how much you can stress commercial buildings. So it's the same process that we're doing with IDP, we're doing with commercial development as well. How much can developers contribute before commercial development, which we need in the city, is harmed? So that, because the Nexus study very much, I read it, it looked very much at need. It wasn't as thoughtful or complete on what can be extracted before you harm development. So that too is ongoing with the same timeline. So we should know the number, I think, pretty soon.
On what that balance is?
Yep. Yes.
And I understand it still may not make the final draft of the legislation, but at least it's something that we would know.
Yeah, and I think the commitment from the Walsh administration is to really, once we have the results, make it public. So once we have the approval at the state, then we can, collectively decide what that number should be.
So, and right now for linkage, how many, so my understanding is mostly linkages after the building's completed, and then there's a 7-year payment plan.
7-year pay-in, correct.
How many of are any of the plans late? How many of them are on target?
Yep.
Yeah, they're actually the information we have from Treasury. Treasury is responsible for collecting linkage payments, not us.
I can reserve that for them.
Yeah, but my understanding, I asked this question today, is that there are no significant delinquencies on the linkage side, just the same, more or less goes for the IDP side as well.
And so I'm curious, since we already brought up BHA, which is one extreme of housing in a big way for deeply affordable units, and I'm very happy again with what we're going to get done there. Swinging over to the other side, Suffolk Downs, and the amount of housing to be built there, about 10,000 units, 7,000 on Boston side. And I'm wondering, and I understand right now we're still in the planning of it and so on and so forth, but we're talking about a new neighborhood in Boston. We're talking about the potential, I think, and this is, I can say this and some may agree or disagree, the potential to do better than the Seaport. And make sure that those who build it, those who live in it, actually reflect the diversity, income, ethnic of Boston, unlike what we have now. and the seaport. And so I'm curious if in that kind of large-scale building, would it make sense to have a different analysis for what the IDP could be there or should be there? Right now, they're following 13%, which, you know, anybody who builds 10 units or more is at that 13%. And I don't know how they exist in the same planet. We're talking about literally two different planets, I think, of housing, and how something so grand that's going to be 20 years of development and building can also be under IDP's same language as, say, Mark were to build 11 units, and that 13%.
Yeah, so, I mean, I haven't been intimately involved in Suffolk Downs, so I will defer to the folks at the BPDA. I know that we have been talking to Phil Giffey and Tom O'Brien about the AOP program, just to see if there's more that we can get from Suffolk Downs to certainly assist that program. But I haven't been close enough to the IDP conversations with Suffolk Downs, and I apologize for that. I know that they're ongoing, but I just haven't jumped into them.
Right.
I think what you're asking, though, is should we do a separate analysis on developments of a certain size to see if they can contribute more?
Yeah, for specific, if we're going to be at the table for IDP, I don't see how we can act as though all developments, especially, I mean, it's the single largest development in Boston's history, right? And the opportunity that it presents. No, that's
I think you're
citing
might
the
be right.
BPDA.
Yeah.
So for us to say, and they have committed just to the 13%, I find that an unacceptable percentage for what they're going to be building and how much their acquisition costs were, I think, $155 million for 162 acres, which, you know, it's about 155 triple deckers. So, you know, with the projection of billions of dollars to be made there, I think the city needs to be fighting for more. And also, just again, in Suffolk Downs, since the public comment period is ending on May 31st, I was wondering if any of the departments from DND will be specifically assessing or talking about the lack of homelessness, or lack of, I think there's no shelters. It seems to be a family size projected of 1.58, average projected family size in Boston's a little over 2.6. There seems to be no schools, there seems to be no community built in that site. And so just, again, as I talked about all the many ways in which you touch housing, this department, are you or anybody else in this department going to be commenting on Suffolk Downs in the comment period and looking at the plans?
We typically don't comment. I'll sometimes go over to a scoping session and make comments, but we don't typically put comments in writing, although we have. So I can check on that, Counselor. I hadn't really thought about that, but I'd be glad to give that some thought.
I just think you have a unique lens from homelessness, from home purchasing, from acquisition, from destabilization, or excuse me, from stabilization, from stabilizing communities, all of these experts and the creativity that has gone behind all of that. And now here is literally build a neighborhood from the ground up. How do you build and prevent displacement? How do you do all those things? And I think that I would hope DND's experts could have an opinion in that. So just on to your creativity and some updates. I did have some questions about the lead. I'm switching totally now to just some of your programs. The lead abatement program and how successful that's been, what areas are you finding it to be still very high? I still find tenants, particularly women with children, who are not getting rented to, and I think that that's one of the issues is because of the lead requirements. I like them, I want them, but how do we get ahead of that and tell landlords not to be frightened of this? How has your advertising been? Have you seen an increase in landlords accessing it?
I don't think we've seen an increase. In fact, I'm looking at Maureen, we're always beating the bushes trying to get people to participate in the program because we want people to participate in the program. We want owners to participate in the program. We do get notified if there's elevated, or the Health Commission gets notified if there's elevated lead levels, to me, that's, that's unfortunate. It shouldn't get to that point, right?
Yeah.
And so then we act and we make all of our services available. But we're always, on every fair, advertising, we're always trying to get the word out about our lead programs, neighborhood meetings, meetings with landlords, nonprofits, for-profits. We're always pushing because we want to spend the money. So it's, but it's always a lot of work to get people to partake in the program. So anything the council can do to help us get the word out, we would be very appreciative.
Okay. With the landlord guarantee program, I'm hoping, or how is it going? Is it, I think we brought it up before, and I'm just, is there a way that we can help increase?
I think it's similar.
Yeah.
We need to get the word out. We need landlords to understand what the program is. I did a little bit more research after we had that hearing before, and you asked about the program. I think in other cities, so we had someone go out and get some feedback from landlords about why they weren't taking up this program, and some articulated that they found it a bit ominous that this was being administered by the city. And that in other cities, it's been more successful when administered by a private partner, a foundation or United Way or some kind of third party. So it's something we might want to look into, is finding a partner. I don't have all the details why landlords are kind of hesitant to engage with the city. I also think they found that this was a little bit perverse, but they found that we were offering up to $10,000, also a bit ominous, that well, are the damages going to be $10,000? So I think we have to rethink the program a little bit based on what we're hearing, why it's not being taken up in Boston like it was in some other cities. But I think there are some opportunities for doing it a little bit differently and maybe having more success.
I think at OHS, there was also some landlord services for mediation and also still meeting with folks. Is that still?
Yes, we have an outside contractor, and I've been doing some, and Dominique Williams has been doing some, and
That's wonderful. I mean, that's actually something we've been referring folks to as well, and I think that's a great service, and I wanted to highlight that. Another policy proposal that I think has come back, or I hope it was filed, was the landlord, the tax credit. And that was for, if I recall, it was for if you kept your rents below market rate.
Yep.
There was a certain, I think, $1,500.
It was a $1,500 credit, state
per
credit.
unit.
And it was, we didn't file it because it had very little traction. However, State Rep Honan has.
Okay.
And so I just learned this about a week ago, and I'm trying to get IGR to set up a meeting with Honan to understand, so he could hear what our proposals are.
Yeah.
But it was actually, I was glad to hear that someone else had sort of taken the language and was running with that. So I can get more information on that because I want it myself.
No, I think it's, again, a wonderful opportunity to allow for a break in taxes, but if you do the right thing. So carrot versus stick, I understand the creativity you need. I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody wish to testify? No one checked the box. Everybody? Okay. Yeah, come on down, Mike. Hey, quick question while he's making his way down. Property disposition fund, is there a balance in our?
You mean the surplus property fund?
I'm sorry, yes.
We wouldn't have that information. It would be in the A&F department, so it would be a question for the budget office.
Yeah.
Which I'm looking at the budget office right now. I'm sure they can get an answer.
Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, thank you. I'm here today representing not just the Mass Alliance of Tenants, but also there's a city rent subsidy coalition at 32 organizations of all kinds, CDCs, activist groups, tenant organizations, that's been working for a few years to propose a city-funded rent subsidy program like the one in Washington, D.C., or Waltham, and now New York, where the city uses its own budget to fund low-income rental housing needs. And I think the city is actually moving in this direction since we started this. The DND budget for housing has actually increased from roughly $6 million a year, this is exclusive of grants, to $18 million a year. And this year, the city is dedicating the new hotel tax revenue for a $4 million low-income rent subsidy for supportive housing. That's exactly the right direction to go. And the idea of earmarking new revenues, new taxation revenues for that purpose is a very important precedent. So that it's evolving in the right direction. And we were very excited when the city got HUD to come up with another 1,000 vouchers. That was fantastic. Some of them it may be enough to solve or almost solve the 13A crisis. We're very close with that. So it's all moving in the right direction, and particularly Councilor Edwards' initiative to go to the Neighborhood Housing Trust and propose the creation of a program, a Boston Rental Affordability Program, which the trust could commit to project-based subsidies to housing, not just the 13A preservation buildings, but also new housing, including the Suffolk Downs housing, to be a source of money for low-income renters if that program is established. So getting the program set up is very important. So now the question is, how do you fund it? So when we met with the mayor a couple of times, and he challenged us to come back with a sustainable funding source going forward. So we did. We came back with different options. The one that we think has the most promise is the one that Councilor Edwards brought up, which is to look at the new growth property tax revenue, not the current budget, just the new growth revenues that is coming from the luxury housing pipeline, the luxury condos and the luxury rentals. So there's actually, in the mayor's housing plan, that 69,000 units actually includes about 7,500 of these really super luxury units. 1,800 have already been built. Those were the focus of the Towering Excess report that the Institute for Policy Studies came up with. Those buildings, those condos sold for an average of $3 million each. And they are generating, we estimate, at least $57 million a year in new property tax revenues. Now, that's already in the tax base, but that's already there. But there's another 5,100 luxury condos or rentals that are in the pipeline now. And we did an analysis of this, which I'd like to share with council. There were 800 of these that came online last year, that were master deeded last year. That means they're reflected in the new city budget, the one that the mayor just filed. One of those buildings is the Pierce in the Fenway. It's 349 units. The condos were basically marketed to Chinese investors who use the E5B State Department exemption to establish permanent residency. The rentals are $12,000 a month for 3-bedroom apartments. I don't know about you, Counselor, but I don't know anybody that can afford that. But that's what they're charging. So that building will, and the other buildings will be generating new revenue. So if you assume that it's $2 million a year not $2 million a year, $2 million for each unit, that will generate enough revenue. 2 million is enough for 2 low-income rent subsidies on a permanent basis. So the new mayor's budget lists $50 million in new growth revenue, property tax revenue. We think that about 16 million of that is attributable to those 800 units, approximately. If 50% of that amount was dedicated to low-income rent subsidies, it's a permanent income stream, right? It's sustainable, and it wouldn't eat up all of the new growth revenue. It would use a portion. That's enough for approximately 800 units, $8 million, 800 units in this fiscal year. The other 4,000 apartments or condos that are under construction in the pipeline, 5 of them are in massive developments like the Winthrop Square Garage or 60 Kilmarnock Street, for example, or 1 Dalton, which will sell for $6 million average each, 160 units. 1 Dalton will generate $10 million a year just by itself in new property taxes. So if the if the mayor adopted an informal principle of 50%, within 4 years, that's enough money to fund 5,000 low-income rent subsidies in tax credit-funded buildings, to lower the rents to the level that people in the city can afford. Most renters that are in need in housing are well below 50% of the median in Boston. In Roxbury, it's below 25,000. The mayor's plan says 21,100 families are not assisted between now and 2030. Those are and they're below 25,000 a year in income. It says 21,000 families that are not assisted. And if we could at least get 4,000 or 5,000 units funded out of the city budget, we'll make a dent in that. So that's what we wanted to share, the new research, and encourage the city. We had a meeting with Joyce Linehan last week, but we need your help to get the mayor to look at that. And it would still leave plenty of new growth revenue for all the other needs in the budget. We just want the city to face up and say, housing is a human right. Housing is something that should be a fundamental city commitment, just like police, fire, and schools. And it should be reflected in a higher percentage in the city budget. Beyond 18 million a year, let's get up to 50 or 60 million.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Donald, Rick, Layla, for your time and testimony today.
Thank you.
I'll see you around.
All right,
This
take
hearing's
care.
adjourned.